welcome to the Adelaide Microsoft IT Pro Community User Group Meetup for September. We had a short hiatus for August. Again, apologies for Matt, he won't be able to make it this time, but he will join in remotely when he has a moment to. So last fast.
Well, let's do welcome to country and all that sort of stuff, and then we'll get into whatever else we're doing.
Okay, I totally forgot what I was going to say, that's why I looked to you. All right, so we'd like to acknowledge the land that we're meeting on today and the traditional custodians of this land, that being the Kaurna people, of those present, past and future. And we also pay respects to those Aboriginal communities that are travelling over to SA to visit or attend many events. Okay, so what's new? Shout out to Adam Fowler, if he's on the call. He did do a post in July actually on the new Bookings with Me feature. So this is something you'll find in your Outlook on the web. So beneath your calendar dates section there's a Create Your Bookings page link. So this way you'll be able to give publicly and internally a link in, say, your email signature that someone can click on, and they'll be able to see your free busy time in your Outlook calendar and book in a meeting with you, depending on what kind of padding you've given that meeting. So you can have 5 or 10 minutes early ends or finishes. And there's other stuff you can do in there, but essentially this is their evolution from the Bookings app. So that was more of a service that you're providing. This is more for yourself, so giving your time out.
Yeah, very cool. I've added it to mine. Really good for anyone that's doing consulting or working with external customers. It's great to be able to get that extra time, to be able to just put that in there so people can book it into your calendar really easy. If you are inside an organisation, you will need the organisation to enable that. But if you're just you've got your own Office 365 subscription, you can turn it on yourself. So, definitely worth having a look at. I think it's really cool.
So Teams, we saw the shared channels feature finally come out. They should have completed rollout by about mid-August. There are slight caveats. You do need to enable your cross-tenant B2B communications in your Azure AD portal. So if you're not managing your own tenant, speak to your administrators to enable that, or at least turn on the bits that you can turn on to allow you to do this. That's more for external channel sharing. Internally, you should still be able to share channels between your teams. But yeah, that's actually a really useful feature. So you're not creating duplicate channels. You've got the same channel across multiple teams, so everyone can jump in on the same conversation without having to switch teams or switch organizations.
Again, if you're working with customers externally, like myself and Andrew do, it's really, really useful for being able to share information when you're working with the client or in one particular location.
So they don't have to drop down and switch organization. It's just in your team's list. So it saves a bit of time. Where's my mouse pointer? So the Q&A feature that we previously saw in the Teams webinar format, that's been brought into Teams meetings. So before a meeting and after a meeting, you can still use this feature. And there's moderation, there's like that kind of thing.
Oh, moderation. I didn't know that was moderation.
Yeah, no, it's similar to the webinar feature. So you can cull off like the duplicate questions just to keep it tidy in the chat. So this will retire the Teams Q&A app from the Teams App Store. Well, I didn't realise there was one.
I didn't realise there was one either. There you go.
Essentially, that's what that is. And you can do anonymous answering as well. So just like in a webinar, you can go, I don't want to just show my name, so I'll just ask this question that someone else may also want to know. So we thank those that do ask those questions. This one crept up. I didn't realise it. We wanted this to happen, right? So be able to deploy Teams and add people into Teams using PowerShell. So using this at scale deployment, you can do, I think it was a rather large number, 500 teams. Yeah. create 500 teams at a time, adding up to 25 users at a time to each team, which is kind of, it's wild.
Yeah. So we use this inside our organisation to actually link up with our what's it called? Customer relation database.
CRM?
CRM. That's CRM. So when we actually sell a consulting gig, it'll then create a new team and then put those key pieces, people in there and all the right communications and bits and pieces that our statement of work, you've got all that, and it sets that all up ready for us, ready to go, so we don't have to admin that, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's better than trying to figure out how to use them as graph to make magic happen.
Yes,
with API
exactly,
calls.
exactly. So, very good.
Yeah. All right, so into the employee experience platform, so Viva Engage. This was announced during Inspire, but actually went generally available on the 23rd of last month. So this will replace the Gamma Communities app within Teams. So the evolving Viva suite. There's at least 6. There's one more. There's the Viva Sales icon, which isn't there, but we're starting to get out of hand here. But essentially, you're going to have this new icon on the left there for your Engage, and this image here includes the storylines or the stories feature, which is coming, I think, next month onwards. So that was something that they tried to do in LinkedIn, and people kind of didn't like it. Did they pull it from LinkedIn? Or it's still there? It might still be there. But
I don't know. Yeah.
Similar to that, it's gone more down that social media path. So.
That's what we need. More social media accounts, right?
No, that's the one account.
True.
Yep. So Viva Goals was the other thing that went generally available. That was August 1st. So that's your objectives and key results. Having a clear idea of organisational level goals, and then down to teams and personal goals as well. Some of the things looking forward to, I think having multiple home sites in Viva Connections would be handy, because we don't need everyone having the same site in Viva Connections on the Teams client. So you could say, someone in engineering could have a different home site to someone in sales. So there's less audience targeting at a play around with the one site. You've got different sites to pull from. I think half of those were already out before they even announced that. Definitely there's Learning Path and Viva Learning. There's integration of Gamma and Viva Topics. But Viva Insights, they're saying there's a redesigned app, so I don't know if it's the same one that's already out there.
I've never played with any of the Insights stuff, so
it's worth doing. Well, maybe we should do a thing next time on this.
Okay. If there are any of these that people would like to see a deep dive on, let us know, and we'll try and find an expert if we don't already have one, to be able to go deeper on them, because, I think the more we see the Viva piece that gets rolled out by Microsoft, the more that'll start to integrate into what organisations will want to do, and especially with things like one that was just released. What was the top one?
Engage.
As our HR teams want to jump on board and see how we're engaged with the business and how we're meeting our KPIs and all of those sorts of things. You see other parts of the business start to push this on rather than it just coming from an IT perspective.
And the other side of Insights, that used to be the workplace analytics service. So invaluable for, let's say, team leaders, managers, because you're able to see your team or your direct reports, how they're spending their time, how they're not spending their time. But there's mental well-being, there's the Headspace app with videos, with meditation and all that, but also getting an overall look of how mental well-being is across the organisation. And they also get into your emails every day to remind you of those. Did you follow up on this email that was sent the other day?
Which can be really useful.
Yeah. I mean, that saved
me
times.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So what's coming? We've got Microsoft Ignite, the main event, coming next month. Registrations, I expect, will open up soon, couple of weeks time. I believe that's going to be all online again. Until they specify otherwise. There is an in-person Power Platform conference in Vegas. If you're mind.
When we go.
But yeah, this will all be online, just like the other previous ones. So make sure you register and grab some digital swag and schedule some useful or interesting sessions on the schedule builder when it releases. An important date is the 1st of October. Basic authentication is getting deprecated. So that's ActiveSync clients, that's mobile in mail clients and stuff like that. So anything that doesn't use multi-factor authentication is going to get turned off. There is a short period where you'll be able to do a self-attestation thing where you can justify why you need it on, and I think you can enable it just for yourself. You can at 10 level delay this, but yeah, really you should try to move everything to modern auth.
Yeah, and as we'll see in the topic of today's show, it's definitely worth getting off of basic authentication. If you're not off basic authentication, you need to absolutely be sprinting towards that and try not to find any excuses to keep with basic authentication going forward. So a bit more of a look at that next step, which is the next point, isn't it? Right, there we go. All right. Yeah, right. So I'll
musical chairs.
Switch over my machine.
Yep.
And then join
the
Teams
meeting
and share the screen. Okay.
I might address some questions in the chat.
Yeah, go for it. Some questions in the chat.
Gavin Hedrick, I would expect if you've got the premium version of Viva Insights, you may get more than just the 4 Headspace videos. I assume there's some integration with Engage and Learning versus Engage with Microsoft Learn. Okay, I think Matt's addressed that. That is in the call.
Andrew, in a Teams webinar I was watching a week or two back, it was talking about speaker voice coming out. When is that rolling out in Teams and associated products? When you're giving a presentation, you're in a Teams meeting, it'll give you feedback on repetitive words, all that sort of thing.
Similar to the PowerPoint Coach.
Yeah, something
Because
like
the PowerPoint Coach moved into Teams.
Right, okay. That's cool. Probably on the roadmap.
How much you look at the camera, how much ums and ahs you do. It's quite impressive.
All right, here we go. Right, all right. So by ways of introduction, for people that don't know who Kevin Mitnick is, he was the FBI's most wanted man for more than a decade for hacking into computer systems and so forth and so on. He never did it for profit. He only ever did it just for gags. He's extremely, extremely smart when it comes to both hacking computer and phone systems, but also social engineering. And he now runs his own consulting business to do that, penetration testing and those sorts of things into organizations. He wrote a great book called Ghost in the Wire, which is his story of the time that he was on the run and subsequent prosecution and a whole bunch of other things. This is a pre-recorded interview he did with our sponsor for today, which is LastPass, around admin passwords and why our admin passwords we need to really start to take more focus on what we actually use as far as admin passwords are concerned. As a consultant, I go into customers' environments all the time. I ask them to set up service accounts for me, and they give me some really bad passwords, as we'll see in here why they're bad passwords, and all the same passwords for the same service account, those sorts of things, practices that we should not be doing. It's something that I've been harping on about probably for a decade now, and it's still happening. So I just thought this was a really good talk that he gave. So it goes for 45 minutes, so I'll shut up and I'll let Kevin talk.
I am really excited to be introducing and talking today virtually with Kevin Mitnick. There really is no one quite like Kevin. He was and really still is the most elusive computer break-in artist in history, and we get a chance to hear from him today, which is really, really exciting. As for myself, I'm Katie Petrillo. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at LastPass. So we spend a lot of our time talking about attacks and threats and break-ins just like this, and working with individuals and businesses to figure out how can they prevent against these types of attacks from happening. So very relevant conversation for us, and just very thrilled to be here talking with Kevin. And his reputation certainly as the world's most famous hacker precedes him. Right now, he's the CEO of Mitnick Security, and his global ghost team of ethical hackers maintains a 100% successful record in their ability to penetrate the security of any system that they're paid to hack into, using a combination of technical exploits and social engineering. He also holds the role of the Chief Hacking Officer of KnowBe4, where he endorses and produces the #1 security awareness training and platform that bears his name as well. And so before we introduce Kevin, I would like to just roll a short video. So let's jump into that first.
I was a hacker because you get that adrenaline rush from the accomplishment of breaking into the system or finding a security hole or getting access to information you shouldn't have.
America is raising a generation of teenage electronics junkies.
It was in the early 80s that, for the first time ever, the public came to understand computer hacking as something nefarious and dark.
The FBI realized that these hackers have skill sets that federal agents and even local law enforcement don't know how to combat. And the government's reaction is to form cyber squads. Kevin's case was the catalyst for that.
Kevin Mitnick, probably the world's most notorious cyber thief.
Kevin ended up as the poster boy for computer crime.
The hacking of America. We've reported time and time again on massive computer hacks, everything from government secrets to data stolen from millions of retail customers.
We wound up in a situation where we're incredibly vulnerable. And maybe if we had listened hard enough to people like Mitnick, we would have built these systems a little stronger.
This is a story about obsession, unauthorized access, and that really pissed off the FBI.
You, sir, were once considered the world's most famous hacker. You're the most wanted man in computer crime, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you're a consultant now, but at one time you were, you bypassed the security systems of Motorola, Sun Microsystems, and Pacific Bell.
Yes, I did.
You served jail time for this. How much?
5 years.
5 years.
And a year in solitary confinement.
Why a year in solitary confinement? You don't look like a dangerous guy.
I'm very dangerous. No. The prosecutor had told a judge during a bail hearing that I could pick up the telephone and connect to NORAD and whistle the launch codes and launch a nuclear weapon. And because of this, the judge actually had a special order that I'd have to be held in prison without access to a telephone. So the only place they could put me was in solitary confinement. So I was there about a year.
Could you do that? Because that would be badass. That would be badass.
Yes. And I was playing this cat and mouse game with the FBI because I must have been a little bit crazy. And as they
were you actually taunting them?
Not taunting them, but I was watching them through the cellular phone system as I was able to work out their telephone numbers, and I hacked into the cell phone system so I can keep track of where they were. So if they got close to me, I would go farther away.
That's a good plan.
It's a really good plan.
Where does American ingenuity come from? It comes from creativity. It comes from people doing things that haven't been done before. The kind of people who are going to start Apple Computer and revolutionize an industry, very often that means that they're going to do things which are going to be out of bounds.
And that's why a lot of companies actually hire Kevin Mitnick right now to protect their jewels.
My case has brought a lot of awareness to companies, security awareness. Hey, there's threats out there. You need to do something about it. And what I get to do today is companies use me to test their security, teach them how to remediate those problems so a real bad guy cannot exploit them.
All right, pretty interesting. Well, with that, I would like to welcome the world's authority on hacking and social engineering. Welcome, Kevin Mitnick. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. It's fantastic to be here. And today, I'm actually located in Surfers Paradise, Australia, so I know we're in a little bit of a different time zone. It's 3 a.m. here, but these are the hours I work. But very excited. I want to thank LastPass for bringing me in to work on this virtual event. So I'll pass it back to you, Katie.
Yes, well, we do appreciate you being here at not the most ideal time, but thank you so much for fitting us into your schedule. We really do appreciate it, as well as everyone here that's already on the call and chiming in with some great questions, which is awesome to see. So we'll get to some of those later today. But so let's start. We just saw a little bit of a history for you, but how did you start out on this journey? I mean, tell us a little bit. Is it true that you wrote the first phishing program ever?
It's quite possible. So as a young kid, I was fascinated with magic. That was my hobby, and we're talking about around 10 years of age. And on the weekends and after school, I used to pedal my bicycle over to a local magic shop in a suburb of Los Angeles. And I used to watch these guys behind the counter, these magicians, perform their tricks over and over and over again. Why? Because I wanted to know the secret. I wanted that bite of the forbidden fruit of knowledge. So fast forward, and I'm in high school. I'm a freshman, and I met this kid who could do magic with a telephone system. He was involved in a hobby called phone phreaking, which is kind of the predecessor to computer hacking. I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar or virtual event have heard of 2600 Magazine and this sort of thing. Actually, 2600 Magazine didn't even start up yet. It was called TAP at the time. Anyway, this kid showed me all these cool tricks he could do with the phone system. For example, he had a special number that you could dial. Don't forget, this is 1970s. You could call the secret number that only telephone technicians knew, and a computerized voice would read back the number you're calling from. It was called A&I. He also gave me this other number called the loop around. So you can call on one number, you could have a friend call on another. This was a phone company test circuit, and you could be magically joined and actually have a conversation. So you can essentially use this to give out a different phone number than that's really your number to actually, communicate with others. And I was a prankster at the time. I loved pulling pranks on friends and family. So one of my favorite tricks to do, and I learned this from this kid, is how to change a home phone into a payphone. So I did this with one of my friends. I changed his phone into a payphone, so whenever his parents tried to make a call, please deposit 25 cents. So my friend called me, change it back, I'm going to get grounded. And I changed it to a prison phone, collect calls only. Anyway, all this crazy stuff. And it was so interesting, telephony to me, and I was also interested in amateur radio. So another student at high school said, hey, Kevin, they're just starting up a computer class this semester you might be interested in, because he knew again about my ham radio and about this phone phreaking, and he just thought it can go together in some way. So I said, sure. So he introduced me to the computer science instructor, and the first question this guy asked goes, are you a senior? No, I'm a freshman. Have you had calculus? No. Have you had trigonometry? No. Have you had physics? No. He's going down the list of courses, and he eventually just says, hey, you're just starting out in high school, so you don't meet the prerequisites to take my class. So if I could take you back into the computer lab in 1977 in high school, it was a VIC 20, a Commodore 64, and this huge Olivetti 110 baud terminal. And that's 10 characters per second. And how the students and the teacher used to interact with the school computer was they would dial up, they'd put the handset in the acoustic helper modem, and they'd go ahead and log in. This was under an operating system called Arista-C that was developed by DEC. And my friend, as we're in the computer lab, he goes, well, Mr. Chris, I think Kevin would be a good candidate for your course. In fact, Kevin, why don't you show him the tricks he could do with the telephone? Well, I started explaining it because at the time I didn't have a cell phone. There's no cell phones at the time. And the first thing the instructor asked, he goes, could you get me the phone number on this phone that they use it to dial out for modem calls? Because he wanted his wife to be able to call him during breaks and lunchtime because there's no phone number on the phone. So, of course, I knew the secret number to call that every phone company text knew, and I held it up to this guy's ear, and the computer's reading back the number of the phone, and this guy was just amazed. He goes, you know what? I'm going to waive the prerequisites and I'll allow you into my class. And I'm sure today, Katie, even as we're talking here on this virtual event, he still regrets that decision. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So anyway, the first programming assignment he gave the class was to write a Fortran program to find the first 100 Fibonacci numbers. And to me, that's like kind of boring. Now, I wanted to write something that was kind of prankish. I wanted to, be able to pull a practical joke again. So remember how they dialed up to the computer? Well, what I noticed is the students would never hang up the phone after they were done and would log out. They just leave the phone connection going. They would just type log out, and the next student would come on, put in their username and password, log in, do their work, type log out, and so on and so forth, even the instructor. So I thought, what if I could write a program that simulates the operating system so when the teacher or the student logs in, they're not logging into the computer, they're actually communicating with my program, and it accepts their username and password and logs them in, and it's completely transparent, and they don't know anything. But of course, it saved their credentials for me in a file. So I never wrote one line of code in my life, but I spent the weekends and after school, really trying to learn about this particular operating system. So I finally was able, after about 4 or 5 days, to develop the code to do this, ran it on the computer in the computer lab, got about 80% of the students' credentials and also the teachers. So the very next day, Mr. Christ is walking to every student's desk to pick up the Fibonacci assignment. And he gets up to my desk, and I have nothing. He goes, where's your work? Didn't have time to do it. He goes, what do you mean you didn't have time to do it? I stuck my neck out, allowed you in my class, even though you didn't meet the prerequisites. And if you're not going to do the work, I'm going to boot you out. I said, but don't boot me out. I wrote a cooler program. And he goes, what are you talking about? I go, isn't your password JohnCo? He goes, whoa. How did you get my password? I said, I wrote a program to steal it. And what I did is on green bar printout, I handed him the code, the printout. He started paging through it and reading the code. And he got this huge smile on his face. And he goes, this is awesome. He shared the code with the other students. So this was the ethics taught to young Kevin Mitnick that it's cool to hack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. Imagine if you had not made it into Mr. Chris's class. Where would you be today? Maybe on a different path.
Who knows?
And I also find it interesting. Yeah, right. But it's also fascinating that you got your start in phones because that's really before we had computer. Now it's, there's so much you can do on the computer, but the technology at the time was the telephone. So fascinating.
Yeah.
You've talked about a couple of different hacks here, but do you have a favorite hack of all time that you love to recall?
Well, of course. It was when I was 16 years old. My favorite hack was actually in the McDonald's. It wasn't for a free Big Mac, I'll tell you that. And again, I was an amateur radio enthusiast. And what I worked out at the time is how to remotely take over McDonald's drive-up windows. So when customers would drive forward to, place their order with the drive-up window and they're talking to the speaker, rather than get the guy inside with the headset, they get me. And you can imagine how much fun you could have at 16 years of age. So I used to, pull jokes. People would drive up, welcome McDonald's, may I take your order, please? They give me their order. I'd say, you're the 100th customer today. Drive forward. Your order is absolutely free on the house. Mm-hmm. And this guy inside the McDonald's is freaking out because the manager runs out into the parking lot. He's, looking into every car. He's looking all around like who could be tampering with the system. Eventually, he walks up to the drive-up window speaker. He bends over and peers inside as if somebody's looking in the speaker. And I key down my radio and I go, what the hell are you looking at? And this guy flies back about 5 feet. So as a 16-year-old, that was my favorite hack.
Yeah. I sense a theme, very focused on pranks throughout your career.
Yeah, that's what my hacking was for. It was never about causing damage or making a profit in anything. It was all about the pranksterism and the control you can get over phone company systems to pull these pranks.
Yeah. It's evolved since then, I'd say, as an industry. So I guess let's talk about that. I mean, the kind of being a hacker, what are some of the more common hacker tricks of the trade? Is there something or one type that's more common than others, and why do you see that?
Well, definitely number one is social engineering, and that's where we're talking about, spear phishing, pretext calls. A lot of people underestimate the power of someone pretexting over the telephone. I started doing this in the 70s and learning with the phone company. And today, when I do this on pen testing engagements, it's 100%. Always works. Then you have exploits, like one of the most dangerous vulnerabilities over the last decade is Log4Shell, Log4j, which is an Apache logging framework where there's a very dangerous remote code execution vulnerability. So, we use this type of tradecraft. So do the bad guys. Now, the bad guys, like the Lapsus group or Conti, these are ransomware groups, will use things like SIM swapping. Why do they want to SIM swap? Is because they could intercept two-factor authentication that's sent over SMS or phone calls. They'll, what's amazing, and I'm surprised people even did this, they actually advertise that they'll bribe people. They'll pay people up to like $20,000 in organizations to allow to basically accept when they get a 2FA push request to say, yes, that's me, or to even install tools like AnyDesk on the system. So these ransomware groups are pretty much, it's any way we can get in, we're going to get in, right? Purchasing compromised credentials off the dark web. One of the techniques that we use, and I use this in pen testing, is called password spraying. This is where we take some common passwords like summer 2022, maybe fall 2022, winter and spring, maybe the company name followed by the year, and we spray that against every user in the organization, against their email, like, for example, Office 365 or G Suite, right? And I got to tell you, pretty much at every pen test we do, we always find a credential, always, right, because of problem with bad passwords. Internet-facing web applications. You heard of the Capital One case where Paige Thompson found a CSRF vulnerability in the web application firewall Capital One was using, was able to execute code, and ended up she was allegedly able to exfiltrate into private information on individuals from the bank, and they just settled a $190 million lawsuit. So these are some of the techniques that bad actors use, and some of these techniques we use on red teaming and pen testing engagements.
And we talk about, what you're just talking about, those reused passwords or just weak passwords where people are using spring 2022. And, that's such a common behavior. And it's really hard to control. Every human, we all want to we just want to get in, so we want to make it as easy as possible. But I think a lot of us are spending a lot of time educating our end users on why that's so bad. But I'd love to hear from you. I mean, why is password reuse and using weak passwords such a bad practice? And can you kind of give some examples of where it's gone wrong? Obviously, you're doing the pen tests around it. I think it's really fascinating work.
Yeah, sure, Katie. So first of all, credentials are king. So you have to think with the hacker mindset, why hack in if you could simply just log in, right? And you're right about the users, right? So they have these policies, these complexity rules that they must use in constructing their password. So typically, they look at it as a roadblock to getting their work done. So they'll just add one. If that doesn't work, if they have to use a symbol, it'll be a 1 and exclamation point. They'll use the month, and every time they have to change it, it will just increment the month. Really, they're annoyed, so they're just using these simple patterns because it's what they have to do, not what they want to do. And people can't remember passwords, right? And a lot of us have passwords to umpteen different websites. So what people do is they remember a small subset of credentials, and they usually have a pattern to them, right? Like some people I know will use their address or will use an old phone number and this sort of thing. And once a bad actor compromises an account, like, for example, if I'm able to get into an Office 365 account as we're doing a pen test, first thing I do is look for other credentials in the account. I'll search for the word credentials. I'll search for the word password. I'll search for the word passwords. I'll look on OneDrive, right? So passwords always lead to other passwords. The other issue that I see come up is organizations allow their employees to reset corporate credentials from their personal accounts. So now the bad actors are targeting their personal accounts. They're finding what those accounts are, those email accounts, through OSINT, open source intelligence. And what they're doing is they're usually going through the password reset workflows, because it's much easier to compromise an account through a password reset workflow than it is to guess the credential. So the users end up being the low-hanging fruit. I had a pen test. Okay, I was working on this pen test. We were able to get the PSK, pre-shared key, to their wireless network. And then I flew to Europe to do a speaking engagement, and that client actually had a retail office in Europe. And so that retail office was next to a bakery. So I sat in this bakery, connected to the wireless network, and then I scanned the network, the local area network, for any machines. And I found there were 3 machines, 3 MacBook Pros that where they had SSH exposed. So I'm going, Macs really don't have default passwords like Windows, right? So I knew this wasn't going to work, but I put in the company name, and when it prompted me for the password, I put in the password as the company name, and by oh my God, I was logged in. I actually did a sudo bash, which would, on the Mac OS, gave me a root shell with no password prompt. And from there, I was able to extract credentials right out of the browser, because I can get into the keychain, look up the Chrome Safe Storage key, which is the encryption key. Then I'm able to decrypt the credentials that are saved in the browser. And these were the things like Salesforce, Slack, NetSuite, Confluence, and Jira. So that's why it's bad.
Yep. And it's interesting, like even just in your examples, I hear a couple things that are trends that are probably more prominent now with flexible work, remote work, people working remotely, like people working on public Wi-Fi's at a coffee shop, like, or working from a random Airbnb they're not at home, right? And it just exposes their machine. And also just, you mentioned like the crossover of people using their work passwords at home and vice versa. And I think that's probably happening more than ever. And it's just like, these are the challenges that businesses are grappling with.
Don't forget, bad actors, they usually will compromise an endpoint and grab the credentials from there.
Yeah. Yep. I want to talk a little bit about one of the major attacks that happened last year with Colonial Pipeline. And it was reported that Colonial Pipeline was a victim of ransomware, particularly because of poor password management and poor behavior. For example, like a valid credential's been exposed in a data breach. So how easy is it for a hacker to find your password because of a data breach?
Well, let me demonstrate it for you rather than just tell you verbally. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick.
Okay.
Minimize here. Let's go over here. Do you see my screen?
You can, yep.
Okay, great. So the first thing I want to show you, how easy could we crack a credential that you think is complex using a GPU cracker. So I have an 8 GPU cracker sitting in Colorado right now. So what I want you to do, Katie, is pick a word. Give me a word.
Pineapple.
Okay, pineapple. Pick 2 numbers.
7 and 3.
Pick 2 symbols.
Exclamation, money sign.
$sign. Okay, great. So we have pineapple 73, exclamation point, $sign. I'm going to convert this to leet speak. You know what that is? I's to ones, 3 to E's, O's to zeros, that sort of thing. So let me go ahead and encode it. And this is what we come back with. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. Yep. That looks like a complex credential that would be hard to crack, right?
Yeah.
So let me go ahead. Now, this is assuming the bad actor can get on into the environment and dump password hashes, which is one of the first things we do once we compromise the network. So let me go ahead and show you this. I'm going to run my demo script. I'm going to put in the password that we've constructed from what you gave me. And what this script is doing is it's actually converting this password to the NTLM hash, because Windows stores the representation of your password in Active Directory as a hash. So what we're going to do is show you how quickly I can crack a hash with this type of credential. So I'm going to go ahead and let that run in the background. And as that's running, because we don't want to watch that, we'd get bored, let me go over to my XKeyscore site. XKeyscore, I'm paying a little bit of tribute to the NSA's tool, because Edward Snowden back in 2013 talked about there's a site called XKeyscore at the NSA that has access to everything. So I was able to get xkeyscore.com. Anyway, so Colonial Pipeline, how was it breached? It was breached through bad actors, I think it was the Rebel group, that ransomware group, was able to find working VPN credentials and data breaches. So why don't we go ahead? We're going to pick the domain. Now, the domain for Colonial Pipeline is fullpipe.com. We're going to go ahead and search on it, and let's see what we find. So here are a number of credentials. You can see the credentials here. By the way, what I like doing is studying the credentials because, like Travis here for D. Brown, Travis is probably a child's name with a birth year. I would guess 1990. You can go through credentials like Jennifer 1 here. Tomorrow could be Jennifer 2. So basically what's very interesting about data breaches is it gives you patterns that people use. So if you aggregate the breaches from different sources, it gives you that information. So in this particular data set, and we have 12.5K here, and I could fetch the next set if I want. But 12,000 credentials with plain text passwords in the clear. And one of these passwords actually worked for their legacy VPN. So once they're able to get into the VPN, then they were able to move laterally inside the business and deploy the ransomware. And then we know the rest of the story. So let's go back. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Let's go back. Oh, here we go. The cracked password. So here's the hash. Remember, we converted your password to the hash. Then we ran the cracker, and we could see we have 8 GPUs here. It literally took 22 seconds to crack this credential. And a lot of people go, oh, if you have a 12-character password, you're good. No. I mean, if you have a 12-character password that's completely randomly generated, yeah, that's good. But when you're using words and you're adding maybe a symbol or two or numbers and you're converting it to leet speak, we could still crack it.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn there as far as what's the recommendation there for folks? How do they, what do they do with their passwords to keep them stronger?
Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, there we go. So obviously the recommendation there would obviously use passwordless solutions, use a password manager. And when you choose your password manager, I mean, not choose it, but when you set up your master password, it should be a pass sentence. I believe something that's 25 characters or more. And something like I went to the beach today with full punctuation, I'm not going to be able to crack that credential, for example, if I have the hash. But if you choose passwords like we just did a moment ago, that definitely is crackable.
Mm-hmm. Length is really important, yeah.
Well, and I really believe in sentences. And not using stuff like lyrics from songs, because you could create a dictionary for that. But, today I had a taco for lunch, period. Right? With the spaces between the words. That's going to be hard for a threat actor to crack that credential. They're going to have to get into the endpoint, install a keylogger, or get it some other way.
Yeah, interesting. And you're kind of touching on this just by seeing all the credentials there for Colonial Pipeline, but I mean, passwords are a huge problem for a business. I mean, what type of impact do breaches like this have on a business and an organization?
Well, significantly. I mean, I remember reading the 2021 Verizon breach investigations report, and credentials are their most sought after data types. They're sold on the dark web. There's sites like Russian Market, like RussianMarket.to. You can reach it from the surface web. And you log onto there, and they have a number of companies because they use bots to compromise these businesses. And you could buy credentials. You could buy session keys. Session keys are really after you log in, your browser gets a session key. Some of those session keys don't expire, like Slack lasts a very long time. I think it even be up to a month. So you could buy these and compromise the business. Personal accounts. And I think people, again, overlook this. There's a whole idea of finding the target's personal account and using that to work your way into the corporation. And password spraying. Again, I'm going back to that because we use this all the time as the initial part of our security assessments. And we're really good at picking a subset of credentials that are likely going to be across the entire company. And what are we going to try to password spray? Like Office 365, G Suite, maybe a VPN. And Microsoft, for example, has mitigations for this. So if you're password spraying, trying different passwords from the same IP, it's going to tell you the password is invalid even though it's good, right? Yeah. So what we do is we leverage the Amazon cloud, so we rotate on every request a different IP address. So Microsoft can't detect it. So if we could do it, so could the bad actors. Ransomware groups like Conti, Lapsus, Rebel commonly breach targets because of poor passwords, and the impact is significant because they're deploying ransomware.
Right. There's an impact on the other side, yeah. I'm going to pull in a question from the crowd because I feel like that it's interesting, and we've talked about it a little before, but, well, actually, I'm going to hold on that, actually. I'm going to hold on that. Let's just keep moving. One of the things that we hear questions about is about your browser's password manager, because, that's very much in people's everyday workflow where the browser's prompting you to store the password. So tell me about that. Like, is that an acceptable place to store passwords? How do you view that?
I believe it's high risk. So when we're doing red team engagements or pen testing engagements and we compromise an endpoint, the first thing we do is go after the stored credentials. Yeah. In fact, you could do this at home. You could go download a tool from GitHub called Lazange, Lazange. I always think of it as lasagna. And it's a GitHub tool that some security researcher wrote. And you run this tool on your endpoint, on your Windows endpoint. It finds credentials and that you saved in email. It gets all the browser credentials, all the database credentials, all in one. So threat actors use these types of tool. This particular tool obviously is detected by all the EDRs and AV out there because it's public. But it's pretty trivial to obfuscate and write your own tool that does the same thing. And when you're using browsers like Chrome and Edge, Firefox, you could actually export all your saved credentials in the browser with just your login credential. Mm-hmm. Very simple. Firefox. So I had this client. He was head of security for this company, and we were able to breach the business, and I was able to get access to this guy's endpoint, which happened to be Mac OS. Those are harder to compromise. And this guy was using a password manager to save all his corporate credentials. So he was doing the right thing. But as I looked on this guy's endpoint, I found a Mozilla directory, and I saw that it was recently populated, and I basically moved that entire directory, exfiltrated it onto my own machine, and was able to recover all the Firefox credentials that this guy stored, right? And literally it was over 700 credentials, and this particular client used the same 3 passwords for all 700, right? And this guy should have known better because he was at this company for like 10 years as a CISO out in California. So it's just amazing that even people that should know better, use passwords and insecurely store them in password managers.
If people who should know better are doing that, imagine what the people who don't know better are doing. It's kind of scary. So I guess in that situation, you're going about your life, you are storing passwords in your browser, then you learn, hey, there's a better way out there, and it's a password manager, so you decide to switch. Is there something that what's the action there to kind of remove that Mozilla file from, in that example, from the computer?
Yeah, in Active Directory, you could set a group policy to prevent people from storing passwords in their browser.
Mm-hmm. So, but do you need to erase credentials if they're already there, stored in Mozilla?
You can. You really have to depend. You have to educate your users through some sort of security awareness. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know about the company going ahead and removing credentials because employees might need to access those because they'll probably want to export those first and then erase them.
Yeah, but, exactly.
There should be an automated way of doing that, but I'm thinking about the end.
I know. There's a lot of direction and guidance that's needed, and they all interpret it in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm doing security assessments, and I advise people to report don't store stuff in browsers. And when I do the next pen test, all the IT folks actually follow that advice, but unfortunately, some of the other users in other departments do not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, one question that came in, when you say endpoint, how do you define that?
Endpoint is, the workstation that a user is using, whether that's a Windows machine or a Mac, Linux, Chromebook.
Okay.
Right? The computer you're actually using.
Yep. Great. Thank you for clarifying. Let's go into, we were kind of skirting around this, we're talking about the browser as a password manager, but let's talk about password managers themselves. And do you see certain types of password managers, are they able to be compromised by sophisticated threat actors?
Well, everything could be compromised. Imagine no matter what password manager you're running, imagine a bad actor installs a keylogger, right, on your machine. They're going to get your master password. So that works if you're using a local type of password manager, like KeePass, for example, right? If you're using a hosted password manager, well, there might be two-factor authentication involved. Anyway, when we're doing red teaming assessments, we do use Tradecraft, where we try to dump all the credentials stored in administrator's KeePass password vault. So I want to demonstrate how this works. So let's go ahead and roll the KeePass video, and you'll see exactly how we do this.
Great. Let's jump in.
I'm going to demonstrate today how bad actors can gain access to the keys to the kingdom, namely the privileged passwords that are in an organization's environment. When we're doing penetration testing and red teaming engagements, we use this exact tradecraft to gain access to privileged credentials so we can actually further the pen test. But of course, your adversaries are looking to conduct malicious activities. It reminds me of this old bank robber named Willie Sutton. The FBI asked Willie, "Why do you rob banks?" And Willie replied, "Because that's where the money's at." So why do hackers target password managers? Because that's where the passwords are at. So today, we're going to assume breach. We're going to assume we're in the network. And we're going to connect to the target workstation using the SMB protocol, the same protocol that's used to map a drive. We're going to backdoor the configuration file for the KeePass password manager, so when the victim opens up the password manager, it sends all their passwords to our command and control server in the Amazon cloud. So let me show you how this works. So over here, the first thing we're going to do is use SMB client, which is a tool to connect to the victim workstation. And I'm using the Kevin account because the workstation that I'm attacking is actually yours truly. So I'm going to connect to the workstation. I'm going to put in the password because, again, assume breach. Assume that we have access to one or more workstations in the organization's environment. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop one of our malicious files onto the file system that will be used in this attack. So let's do that first. So we're going to go to the Kevin directory, to app data, to local, to temp. So really, all this is a temporary directory that's used by the Windows operating system. We're going to upload a file called sort.vbs, which is a Visual Basic script. We're going to put it in the temp directory. So as you can see, it's been uploaded. The second step, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the KeePass directory where the configuration file is stored. So let's do that. And here's the configuration file. The configuration file is an XML file. This is not an application. It's not an executable. It's really just plain text that's organized in a certain way. And this is the configuration file KeePass is using. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this file over to our attacker box. So we're going to get the file. Now we're going to exit off the Windows workstation that we're connected to through the SMB protocol. And now what we're going to do is we're going to backdoor the XML file. So we have a script that does that. It's called backdoor. And simply run the script, and it's modified the configuration file to do our attack. So in the poison directory, here's the new configuration file. So now what we have to do is we have to upload this file back onto the Windows endpoint. Let's go ahead and do that. Connect back. And now we're going to go back to the directory where KeePass is. And here we have the original configuration file. It's 4,300 bytes. There's a backup of it as well. So now what we're going to do is upload our version. So now if you look at it, it's about 5,300 bytes. So this is the backdoored XML file. So again, the steps are we uploaded a Visual Basic script and we modified the KeePass configuration file. So now the trap has been set. So let's go ahead and exit. We're going to run our server. So what this is doing, it's just sitting there and waiting for the passwords to be sent to our command and control server, which is right here. So let's go back to the victim's workstation. We're going to go ahead and open up the password manager. We're going to put in our secret password. And we'll look over here and there's nothing. As soon as I open up the KeePass database, the passwords have been sent to our server in the cloud. You can see that it's a database called My Passwords. If you look over here on the top, it's the same database. And if the individual has several databases that they open, we get a copy of all their credentials. And what's nice, if you look down here, we actually stored a copy in our database directory. So if we exit here and go to our database directory, we have the file here as well. So this is a technique that we use to exfiltrate credentials when we're engaging in a pen test or we're doing a red team type of test. We actually use this type of tradecraft to accomplish this objective. Of course, real threat actors are using this to gain more control and more access to the environment so they can do nasty things like deploy ransomware. So how do you protect your organization against this type of attack? Well, one suggestion is to firewall the endpoints. So enable the Windows host firewall to essentially block access to SMB and to RDP and to every service, and only open up a service as you need it. And if you follow the least privileged principle and consider using a zero trust architecture, that can help you as well.
Nope, I think we got a little cut off. Are you there, Kevin?
Yeah. Can you?
Oh, great. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. That wasn't hacked. That's good.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings up some questions from folks, and and this is, I see this coming through in the Q&A as well, but how do companies know if their information is secure from hackers? Like, how do you know that you're doing the right thing, right, and on the right path?
Well, you really don't know until you get an indication of compromise, and then your incident response team or your threat hunters, well, threat hunting is a little bit different. That's incident responder actually follows up on an alert, while a threat hunter is, hired by a company to look for threats that are in the network. Mm-hmm. Of course, companies should consider using a SOAR platform, security orchestration automated response platform, to help respond to those incidents. Otherwise, they're going to get overflowed and there's going to be alert fatigue. But nothing is truly secure. So we have to strive to mitigate risk by adopting best security practices. So what are some examples? Having good password hygiene by using a password manager, learning to spot the red flags in malicious emails, but also changing corporate culture. So you change the behavior of your users when they interact with email that have links or attachments. That way they know how to treat it, and also keeping their operating system and applications up to date. Now, usually the company does the operating system side, but users should also be concerned about, because you could have BYOD equipment, keeping their applications up to date as well. Because for a user at home, for at-home users that are using their own equipment, it is very difficult to determine whether you've been compromised. You'd have to see like a pop-up, like your antivirus software popping up an alert, right? unless you're a security expert or somebody that's done forensics or that's been involved in threat hunting, you're probably not going to see it. And some of these sophisticated attacks are very clever because they use fileless malware. They use persistent mechanisms that are hard to find. So users that aren't technically astute are working from a disadvantage. And when you're doing the right thing is really practicing good security hygiene and following best security practices.
Yeah, a couple of things there. There's a question that came in here as well. Like, yeah, how do people know? Like, is there any way to like broadly sweep or look over the computer to know if there has been some sort of a breach? And what I'm hearing from you is no. Like, you would either see that pop up or you'd have to be a hacker to be able to identify that. And then is there like, how do you get rid of that? Without just wiping the laptop?
Depends on the sophistication of the threat actor. I mean, if you're dealing with a group like a ransomware group like Conte or Lapsus, you're probably not going to see a thing. If someone is just blasting out malware, maybe your AV pops up and you're going to see it. Now, again, it goes to the sophistication of the user. They could be somebody that's knowledgeable about IT security or somebody that's working, in manufacturing that might, just be using their computer as a tool to get their job done. So, but it's not like you can install, particular, from a corporate perspective, you want to use a good EDR, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But from a user perspective on a personal machine, usually that type of sophisticated endpoint detection and response tools aren't available, right? Mm-hmm. So then they're left with using the typical antivirus.
Right. That's like the catch-all.
Yeah, it's the catch-all. So I get that question all the time. And it's quite difficult if you're dealing with a sophisticated adversary.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I want to move on to our next question because there's a lot that's come in. I've seen a lot of questions come in through, like when you were talking about, when you were going through the password cracking demo, also showing the KeyPass video about where the role of 2FA and MFA and what does that play. And like we're taught and told to enable two-factor authentication wherever possible, right, to prevent hackers getting that access to our web-based sites. So how does a threat actor still fool you and the employees and bypass that 2FA? How is that possible?
Through phishing. So what we could do is use phishing attacks to steal the session key of that user after they authenticate and use that session key ourselves to get access to the user's accounts that they're currently logged into. So why don't we go ahead and roll the Okta video and you'll see exactly how this works.
Cool. Let's do it.
Okay. Many small and large organizations use single sign-on services like Okta and OneLogin to streamline user access to their applications. This provides an opportunity for the bad guys to leverage this knowledge in order to compromise the organization, specifically their employee or contractor computer applications, including email. They do this by using deceptive phishing attacks, and I'm going to demonstrate just how this works. Now here is the victim's computer. They're logged into their email, and their email is john.rafuse@target.us.com. You can see this here on the right-hand side. And so the objective of the attacker is to gain access to John's email and other applications. And in this case, we're going to demonstrate this with Okta. So let's go ahead through the email here. And we have an email from Okta support. We're going to go ahead and click it. And here is the from Okta support. And what the email is telling John is that he has to resync his Okta applications. And if he doesn't do so, he's going to be denied access to them. And that is stated right here. And this is a very powerful influence tactic. When an attacker is telling a target that they're going to lose access to something unless they comply with the request, it is more likely that the victim is going to comply. So, before we go ahead and click the link as the victim, I want to show you something. We're going to hover over the link, which is a button here, and on the lower left-hand side of the browser, you'll see that it's going to a link at Okta.com. Well, Okta.com is a very trusted company, so when people hover the link to make sure they're not going to a phishing link, they're going to trust this. and this is part of the major deception that the attacker has set up. So let's be the victim and follow through. So we're going to go ahead and click the link. And now we're going to have to authenticate to resync those applications. So let's go ahead and put in our username. Let's put in our secret password. And of course, John uses two-factor authentication like everybody should. So let's go ahead and send the code. And the code is received on my mobile device. So I'm going to input it here. And there's the code, and we're going to go ahead and log in. And here we are. Now the user is logged in, so there's an assumption here that everything is working and the Okta applications have been resynced. We'll even go into the email to make sure that it's working. So what the victim doesn't know is they gave the attacker complete access to all their applications using whatever they're allowed to access using their single sign-on provider. So let's go over to the attacker computer and see what has happened under the hood. So here we are. We're back at the attacker's computer here in the cloud. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a script, and what the script is going to give us is the actual session key to the victim. So the victim was using two-factor authentication, and so even though here we're able to obtain the email username and the password, we're still not going to be able to log in as the victim because we don't have access to the victim's mobile device. So what we had to do in this case is actually steal the session cookie so we can impersonate the victim and get access to the keys to the kingdom. So let's go ahead and highlight this. Then we're going to open a browser here on the attacker computer. First of all, we have to go to the URL of the victim, which is target United States at okta.com. And now we're going to go ahead and load into the browser. We're going to load in the stolen session cookie. Just as simple as that. We're going to close it, and now we're going to refresh the browser. And here we are. We're now logged in to the victim's applications in Okta. And of course, we could click on Gmail, and we have access to the victim's account. So I've demonstrated many of these phishing tricks in the past, but what's new in this case is when you hover over the link, it is going to a trusted provider. Just because it appears to come from someone trusted or something that's been approved by your IT team, never assume it is safe to click on it. You have to think about, what is the nature of the email? What is the sender asking me to do? Is it in the normal course of business? Have I been asked to do this before? Because even if you're cautious and hover over the link, you still need to stop, look, and think because it might be deceptive.
Yeah, that's a great demonstration, and also brings up an interesting, one of the things we talk about here at LastPass is having a password manager. One of the benefits in a phishing attack is that when there is a suspicious URL that isn't what you already have stored in your vault, LastPass won't recognize it, and so it won't prompt you to fill it right away. So that should be like a red flag. So it is one step to prevent those phishing attacks as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, great. Yeah, exactly. That does help give the user notice that something odd could be going on.
Exactly. Right. It's just that, again, a little bit of a red flag. All right, I know we only have 3 minutes, but we have been answering a lot of questions throughout, but I think that one of the questions ties into really where we're going to end up here, which is just like, what can I do now? Like, what can I protect myself? Like, some of the themes that I'm seeing across in the questions is, should I be following a password policy? Is that the number one thing I should be doing? How do I deal with the sharing of passwords in a secure way? So what can all the listeners that are joining here today, like, what can they do right now?
Well, depends if it's an organization or consumer. So what would you like me to address?
Let's do business. Let's do the business side.
Okay. So business, so you should consider a zero trust architecture. Mm-hmm. What this does is it removes implicit trust. So if you're inside the organization, it's the same thing as being at the local Starbucks. And this is what we call just enough access in just in time, and it's continuously verified. There are 3 principles. One is always verify. The second is least privilege. That you operate from least privilege principle, and you always assume breach. It's difficult to implement, but that is definitely an architecture that companies should go towards. Apply patches consistently on your internal network as well. We tested a recent large car manufacturer, and there was an external Java application we were able to exploit because they were not patching it appropriately. Segment your network. It's really important to do network segmentation because what that does is it limits the ability of a threat actor to laterally move in the environment. Perform penetration testing and web application assessments. If you have an internet-facing web application, consider throwing a web application firewall in front of it. Like I do it on my website. I use Cloudflare, but there are others out there. I'm not promoting Cloudflare, but any type of web application firewall, it's kind of like an extra layer or defense in depth. Rename your administrator accounts, because that's the first thing is bad actors know your naming convention. Rename your administrator accounts. Use a product called LAPS. That's by Microsoft, so it creates random credentials for each machine with a local administrator account. Minimize all privileged accounts. So when I'm testing organizations, I see that a ton of users or individuals have domain administrator rights. That should be very closely curtailed to the minimum amount of users. Security awareness training is critical. A lot of the time, the type of tradecraft we're using is sophisticated phishing attacks, like we showed you with the Okta demonstration, and whether you're using two-factor or authentication or not is completely irrelevant. So you should consider security awareness training and also an awareness training that helps exercise your user's mental muscle by doing simulated phishing. Implement MFA everywhere. You mentioned, Katie, multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. Try to stay away from SMS, because if the bad actor is able to do a SIM swap on your phone, they can intercept that SMS. Also with push 2FA, where push is a message to your phone, yes, this is me, I authorize it. What bad actors are doing now, even the ransomware groups, is they're overloading people. What they're doing is they're triggering the push notifications over and over and over again. And what it's doing is it's creating fatigue. So sometimes users will just say, yeah, okay, I'm good, that's me. And it lets the threat actor in. The best type of MFA would be using the FIDO protocol, which is like, you use a YubiKey, a hardware device, you plug it into your machine. That is phish-proof. That is phish-proof multi-factor authentication. Using a new generation EDR in the business. EDR is endpoint detection and response. So you're looking at products like CrowdStrike Falcon, VMware's Carbon Black, Cylance, and these type of EDRs will really help organizations obtain the necessary telemetry so threat hunters and incident responders could detect these type of attacks that are happening and respond to them quickly.
Yep. Lots of good tips there, very specific, which I think the folks will appreciate because there's some very specific questions in there. But I do want to be aware that we are just a minute over our time. I think we could probably go for another hour if we had the time, but we don't. So I would just like to say thank you for everyone for joining. And, of course, thank you, Kevin, for joining. It's been a great conversation, tons of good questions. I really appreciate the engagement and you spending the time and your early morning with us. And so with that, I'll just say thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I mean, literally, we could do 2 hours.
Totally.
So much. Your last question could be 1 hour of a response. So I'm really covering the high road. But what, again, organizations should look at best practices, zero trust, look at how they manage their privileged credentials in the environment, because that's the number one target for a threat actor, by using password managers to store that. Because I see in a lot of businesses, they're using Excel spreadsheets. Some are password protected, some aren't. And that's not a good practice. So I hope everyone out here, I hope everyone that's been listening to the event today stays safe. And again, it's been an honor to speak for LastPass. In fact, if you're watching my demonstrations, you'll notice in the upper where you have your browser extensions, I'm also a LastPass customer.
We love to hear that. That is what we want to hear. So that's awesome. That's fantastic. Well, because there were some questions. What's your opinion of LastPass? I think that answers that. All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kate.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
This is brought to us by LastPass, so they've sent us some swag there to give away, some pens and socks and camera covers, so grab one on your way out. LastPass is a great company as far as password safes are concerned. It is one. I'm not saying that you should use that particular brand, but using one does greatly improve your password response, because it can generate random passwords for you that are nice and long. You don't have to remember them. You don't have to type them in, and away you go. Some of the things that I would recommend on when you are picking a password application is that you get one that's enterprise grade, so you can share passwords amongst people within inside your organization. One that will allow you to have home accounts for your end users as well, so they can take it home and use it on their personal passwords, because again, like you said, if you can get into one password that someone has and then just shift sideways, it's a big thing. Being able to secure it with a good two-factor authentication. So he mentions FIDO standard there and something he called YubiKey. If you want to have a look at what YubiKey is, I sell these through one of my channels, but again, I just think that they're great, so I've got a whole bunch of them. Basically, at the end of the day, it's a keyboard. When you plug it into your system, Windows identifies it as a keyboard, and when you press the button, it types in a authentication token that's a once-off authentication token, and away you go. This particular one is USB-A, but it also has NFC built into it, so I can just scan it with the back of my phone. They also do them in USB-C to keep them nice and small on your keyring, which is really nice. And then there's my daily one that I keep left in my actual laptop, and that's the entire thing there. That's a part of it. So really, really cool. So this will not only do the FIDO protocol, but also the smart card protocol, PIV protocol, those sorts of things as well. So lots of other things that they can do as far as those are concerned. Now, when it comes to things like those good KeePass applications, the fact that you give it its password and you are securing it with a second factor authentication is just a blob. So the zero knowledge model that Kevin was talking about is exactly why a company like LastPass, that sort of solution, works really well. If you go looking up LastPass, 2 weeks ago, they lost one of their developer keys, usernames and passwords. Someone, a malicious actor, got in and stole their entire source code for all of their work. Now, what does that mean? It means that all the proprietary stuff of how they identify what field to fill in and how they're attaching to Chrome and things like that are lost. However, even if they, first of all, they didn't get the user's data, even if they did, there is no way that a malicious actor can then undo that, because LastPass don't actually know what my password is, the last password I ever need, to get to that data. So it decrypts it locally. So it's all protected by maths at the end of the day. So even if they did lose all of their customer database, that information, that blob of information about me, they wouldn't be able to unencrypt it without, first of all, knowing my password, and second of all, having something that I have. In this case, the FIDO protocol YubiKey. Yes. Anything else you want to bring it up on that?
Sort of related. So I went down to the MOD recently, and they've actually got an exhibition at the moment a couple of weeks ago I went to the MOD down the road, and they have an exhibition on cybersecurity and account breaches, being more aware of
dodgy stuff, misinformation. One of the things I was telling was there's a printout of all the leaked passwords from the LinkedIn breach a few years back, and it's all in hard copy on a display. So there's about 10 volumes, about this thick, of all passwords in that breach. So go over, have a look. I made sure mine wasn't in that box that yours might be. But yeah, there's all these activities and tests you can do there as well. And there's a 3D model printed. It's the amplification of a breach. So as it starts off, it gets big, or the 10-year-olds it gets out to space about this wide, and it's just different layers that they travel. See how impactful it is.
But I guess the whole point of this is just to show that how important it is those service accounts, those admin passwords that we have are set correctly, they're set well, and we put some of those practices in place there of that least privilege, just-in-time access passwords, those sorts of things, to be able to really protect our systems. Because once they get a toehold, then that's it, and they can start to put in keyloggers and all the nasty stuff that Kevin showed there. So I like the fact that he said that one of the key things you can do is just turn on Windows Firewall. You know, it's been around since XP Release 2, back in the 90s. So, it's something that we should be, well and truly aware of.
XP2 wasn't the 90s.
Wasn't it?
No.
When was it? I was just trying to think.
The noughts.
It was the noughts. It was the early noughts. Okay. I'm just showing my age now. Yeah, okay, cool. So that's it. I'll leave it for that. Any questions that anyone has?
I just asked,
Yeah.
reference to using a sentence was better than...
A sentence is way better. Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Using a passphrase instead of a password is actually much better, because coming up with something, asking people to remember random things or so forth is really, really difficult. So we try and come up with words that we know, and then we replace ats and so forth. And we saw that how that easy that hack was. But we are used to typing text in an email or any of those sorts of things, a sentence. We're used to being able to type that type of thing. Because we add extra punctuation and things like that as we actually type things, it makes our passwords much, much longer, but easier to type in. So putting in to be or not to be, ? That is the question, full stop, with spaces. All of a sudden, that's a huge password, but it's dead easy to type in. So,
but it's difficult to.
But it's very difficult to hack. So when he showed Pineapple 373 or whatever it was, 8-character password, every additional character you add, it exponentially increases. So if you go from 8 out to 12, all of a sudden it goes from 22 seconds to 3 years, or 5 years. If you can get out to 15 or 20. Now, you tell people a 15-character password, they go, I don't want to enter a 15-character password. But if you go, you can't handle the truth as your password, that's actually...
Let me just jump in on that one too. And we can discuss...
Pete Calvert, everyone, if you don't know.
We can discuss this a lot further if you're going to stick around as far as security is concerned. There are different types of authentication, basic authentication, and LM hashes, NTLM, and Temp2s, and so on, FIDO, OAuth, OpenID Connect, and other ones like that. Some systems will have multiple layers of authentication, so they can fall back to earlier ones. NTLM is still, and NTLM2 is still used on a lot of systems. LM hash is sort of pretty much gone. If you go have a password that's 14 characters or less, it actually just pads out the password with zeros and hashes that. If you go and breaks into 2 7-bit chunks, byte chunks, if you have a password that's longer than 15 characters or more, it can't do that, which is actually good, because it's basically they can't use some of the older tools, the hash tables and things like that, to crack your password. However, any discussion on passwords themselves, they're legacy. We want to shift away from that to modern ones. So the Authenticator app on your phone. Biometrics, fingerprint scans, facial recognition, that sort of thing are much, much better. It's much easier for somebody to steal your password or even your passphrase and use it without you knowing. It's a lot harder for somebody to steal your face. You'll chop off your fingers, okay, without you knowing.
Absolutely.
It's depth as well. And they've done tests with twins and have found that even then it's not. You can distinguish between twins. Is this a topic that people want to have in future sessions? Do you want to have more of the anatomy of an attack or things more on zero trust or things like that? Is that something of interest rather than just watching a video?
I think it would be nice to have a follow-up session to show Windows Hello, right?
Yeah.
Not just on your own personal laptop. Yep. And that's actually a good session.
Is it possible to crack the passphrase with steganography, like sticks forward, steg online?
Anything's possible, and we're at a point in time where once we start talking about quantum computing, all bets are off.
Yeah, all bets are off, yeah.
So anything that requires you to type in a string of characters can be cracked, and if you have a way of being able to hook in, a lot of Kevin Mitnick's work is involved in bypassing the normal channels of doing things to be able to grab the information as it's in flight. If you get a keyboard logger onto somebody's machine, or if you get some other man in the middle interrupting the stream that's happening, doesn't matter how long it is. And whatever you type in, even if it's been encrypted on your computer, and then they're using that hash to authenticate you, it's just a hash that's been used to authenticate you. So as long as somebody can grab that hash, even if they can't reverse it to find out what your passphrase is, they can still do a replay hash attack in order to use that to pretend they're you to get some things. So there's a whole raft of other bits and pieces that we put around that defense in depth so that you're not relying on just a single technology or a single way of doing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just extending what you said on when these sessions were good to do similar. I mean, again, adding into more on not just password but least privilege access and stepping into baseline Essential 8, stuff like that would be a good extension on just expanding the topic a little bit.
Okay. The biggest impact that you are likely to be able to get in organisations if you want to improve security is user awareness.
User awareness training is huge, and certainly turning on multi-factor authentication on everything that you can, both inside and outside of your organisation, so your Facebook pages and other things like that.
Do you remember what Brett said this was? What was this interpreted by the computer as? Keyboard. In other words, it's emitting a string of characters into the computer. There are people that have created things that look very much like this, but actually inject malicious programs. They're typing malicious programs in under your account into the computer to compromise it.
So getting away from passwords is absolutely the way to go. And until we do, this is kind of the stopgap in getting to that least privilege and But no, absolutely. I think we'll certainly have a look at that. So you mentioned the Essential 8. If anyone doesn't know what the Essential 8 is, the Australian Cybersecurity Council, I think they're called, ACSC, have 8 recommendations for you to implement to secure your environment. A lot of government organisations are having to implement those and show that they've implemented those Essential 8. One of the tricks with the Essential 8 is, of course, then actually putting them into practice. It's all well and good talking about them like this, but actually putting them into practice inside your organisation can actually be a bit of a challenge. So, we might pick 1 or 2 of them and do a deep dive on them.
I think, again, yes, it's driven by government, but I think it'll get traction more, and there are more attacks.
Correct.
Cybersecurity gets stronger. Typically, it comes into mainstream commercial business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I do some for small businesses, cybersecurity consulting and so forth. And some of the horror stories that I hear are, not fun.
I want pizzas outside.
Pizza outside.
The recording.
Okay, thank you very much. we will call it there because we're already well and truly over. I apologise for anyone that needed to leave at 5 o'clock. We can take this discussion. There is pizzas out there for anyone that wants to stick around for some pizzas and ask questions and all of that sort of stuff. And that's about it. We'll put the presentation up on our YouTube channel. In the next day or two, and you'll see us post in a meetup group what the link is and everything like that. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.